I want to do a whole episode on emergence.
We really should, because it's such an important concept. And emerge from your chrysalis of existence. Welcome, everyone, to Love Letters to the Future. I'm PJ Manny, and this is my co-host,
Laura Faye Tenenbaum, and we're so glad you're here. So today we have a really good friend of mine. Her name is Sarah DeWitt. We met when we were at NASA, and she was in the chief scientist office when we first met. And then she moved over working on leadership development. And then Sarah and I both left, I think, within a year of each other, maybe 2 years of each other. Ever since then, she's become an expert in transitions. And I think that really fits with the theme of Love Letters to the Future, which is just to remind everybody and to remind ourselves we're in the middle of a breakdown of old systems of humanity. So, Sarah, we're going to talk about what, in your opinion, hasn't been working in leadership, in old systems, in whatever you want to discuss, and then some vision for the future, a love letter per se, of what we think we could do better as humans. So welcome, Sarah, to the show.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
We're really happy to have you. Thanks. It's funny because you were saying to me just the other day something about we're moving away from like a world of machines. And I just thought, wow, I mean, you and I are coming from a world where machines are so elevated. And to hear you say you're moving away from a world of machines, I just thought that was really surprising. So do you want to talk to that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, maybe just to state the obvious right up top, we are and we are not moving away from a world of machines.
Toward machines so hard now.
So hard, yeah. So it's not all or nothing or all or one thing. The world of machines that we're moving away from, it's literal machines, but it's also very much like the metaphorical machine. So I talk often about the age of modernity, which is this kind of current era that we're all living in, all of us humans that are alive on the planet today. But it's an era that has been around for a while, and it's been dominating our ways of thinking and being and operating in the world.
Give us some examples of machines that are dominating.
Yeah, exactly.
Of naughty machines.
So it's kind of the metaphorical machine. So we live our lives with the machine as like an ideal concept. So this is what I mean when I say we're moving away from machines. So machine as ideal concept is like everything can be reduced to parts. Those parts are cogs that are replaceable. They are arranged in ways to work as efficient and productively as possible. That is really the goal, is productivity and efficiency. And so when we operate everything like that, a lot of things happen, a lot of things manifest. So you can apply all of those machine traits to like a rocket ship, for example, and that's great because rockets are complex and they need to operate efficiently and productively in order to like get where they need to go. And you need to be able to replace parts. That's all really important. But when you apply that same logic to like a living system of humans, like an organization or a business,
or healthcare,
yeah.
or family, or so many things, education system, it's applied to all those things.
Exactly. I mean, healthcare is such a good example, right? Because you've all been into a doctor's office where they're like conveyor belt, like just moving everybody through and treating every single human living being like they're the same.
Like they're just cog.
A cog, and they're a collection of cogs too, right? They have a brain, they have a heart, they have a hand.
Yes. You go to the bone doctor, you go to the hormone doctor, and they don't interact.
And, we operate agriculture that way. Our whole food system is run like a machine. So it's this kind of metaphor, but it's kind of more than a metaphor, right? Because it's actually how things are working and it's how things are operated and run. And it's really hard, I think, for me, and I think for a lot of people to like imagine any other way of operating because we've kind of just been doing it that way for so long. It's like, it's in our bloodstream.
It's a myth, right? PJ would call an old myth that maybe doesn't work anymore.
It's certainly a century or two long, and this is the problem.
Yeah, at least. And there's actually 3 myths that are combined all in this like age of modernity. And the machine metaphor kind of underlies all of them. But the three myths of modernity are that humans are separate from nature and therefore dominant over, power over the rest of the living world. Humans are separate from each other. This is where we get stories of like otherness. I know you two have talked about that on previous episodes that I've listened to, and therefore can dominate and have power over certain other humans based on whatever characteristics you want to choose. We've done it many different ways. And then the third one is that humans are also separate from themselves and from their own aliveness. And so this is where, like Laura and I have talked about this for years, this emphasis on the brain and the mental domain and the thinking as like more important and more elevated than any other part of being a living, breathing human, including your own like body intelligence or emotional intelligence that might give you information that is different from what your brain is telling you is the most important information.
So what you're saying is Descartes has a lot to answer for with "I think, therefore I am."
Exactly.
And the whole man's dominion over nature. I mean, we're talking about a myth that's anywhere between 2,000 and 5,000 years old. It went with monotheism. Those original stories were the first time people thought that man had dominion over nature. Maybe if you were a desert-dwelling nomadic tribe, it felt like that, maybe that gave you hope.
I think it's worth it to just repeat the three again. I always need repetition, and we've had the negative sides of these myths repeated into our cells. So just let's hear them again so we can really look at them, and then we can move on to what we replace them with.
So humans are separate from nature is the first big myth. Humans are separate from each other, and humans are separate from themselves and their own aliveness.
And there's so many ways that those play out.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, one of the big ones that we haven't even talked about specifically yet today, but I know you two have talked about, is the whole like male versus female thing, right? Like men and women having kind of different roles in society, and that whole power over and domination theme. And that's an example of like humans being separate from each other, right? Like that we can somehow separate men from women and place one group over the other.
Ouch.
And I think, Laura, what you were just pointing to something that is often, I think, overlooked. Somehow, magically, it's overlooked. And yet it's so important, which is that these myths, they're not just like out there, something that we can point to and be like, oh, that's happening over there. It's actually, we've internalized them.
Oh, when I said ouch. Yeah.
Like every human, well, I shouldn't say every, but many humans, the majority of humans who are walking around on this planet today, carry inside of them these myths and these stories of like humans are separate from nature, humans are separate from each other and therefore can control and dominate each other, and humans are separate from their own aliveness. Like this is a story that is perpetuated through like our own beliefs about who we are and how the world works and how humans work. And that's what's really kind of sad, I think, about all this. And it's also like driving the continuation, the perpetuation of these myths, is that like we've become so enamored with them that we believe them so deeply that it's hard to separate and kind of like create a new story for all of us if we can't even create it for ourselves internally.
It's so interesting to me because all of those myths involve a power dynamic. They all involve something or someone having power over the other part. And it's that pain that Laura feels, it's that unevenness we all feel when we even hear these myths that we take so for granted and feel like they're baked into our sense of existence. When, again, they're relatively recent in human history. That's the part I find extraordinary. That, again, like I joke that Descartes has a lot to answer for, but, a lot of that's just some Enlightenment ideas. I can understand how exciting it was for someone to discover that the brain had a purpose and worked so hard for us, but to lack that biological underpinning of understanding that we're just a giant feedback loop, that our body embodiedness feeds our brains and our brains feed our bodies. And
Our gut bacteria.
oh, okay, I'm the queen of brain gut dysregulation, so I feel this acutely.
I thought you were going to say you're the queen of gut bacteria, which is, if you want to be a queen of something, that's a much cooler queen to be a queen of.
I would like to soon be the queen of the microbiome. But yeah, I think this is so interesting. Do you think that some of these ideas took off because they were used for power?
I think so.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard to say. Obviously, I wasn't there, but it doesn't take a huge leap of the imagination, right? To like envision a world in which people, especially during like an age of enlightenment, the beginning of the scientific revolution, like it's exciting. There's all this potential and prosperity that's like right on the horizon that can be made possible if we can galvanize around like these certain ideas. And the ones that kind of bubbled to the top are the ones that very conveniently, put certain people in positions of power and kept them there. And not just power, but money, right? Like wealth. And we're still seeing that play out today. And
We're seeing it at peak
exactly.
today. The peak of the oligarch, the broligarch, is happening literally right now.
Yeah. And it makes so many things possible, and we don't need to dwell on all the dark things, but like if you think about all of what this has made possible, like it's kind of unfathomable.
Well, we're fathoming it right now. The one that hurt the most when you started talking about it was the one of disconnection to the self. It made me suspect that if we're going to advocate for shifting, then that would be the first one to shift.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of people who would agree with you and are really focusing on that and working on that. And there are people who are like, I don't have the patience to like work with each single individual to try to shift consciousness on the individual level. And so I'm going to work on some like much bigger project. One great example of what you just described, Laura, is a project called the Inner Development Goals, which is, it stems from the Sustainable Development Goals from, the United Nations and all that. And it's essentially, it takes the Sustainable Development Goals and asks the question of what would we need to develop as individual humans in terms of our consciousness and our actions and our behaviors to really make those goals possible and like bring them to life. And it's all about like reconnecting with one's other centers of intelligence, not just relying on the mental domain entirely and exclusively. So, that's like one really good example of like a group of very smart people who've put together a program, like a whole system of imagination around that.
So what about your work? And
what's the new story you're telling?
Yeah. Tell us the current work that you're doing now, which is trying to shift these old systems that used to work that no longer work anymore.
Yeah, exactly. My whole career, my whole adult life has been a winding road. It's taken me quite a while to figure out kind of where I land and where I fit. But it really is very much feeling very aligned in recent years, which is great. What I'm working on really is exploring and practicing what this new paradigm could look like. So stepping out of the age of modernity and these three major dominating myths and really living and working in a way that is often referred to as regenerative. It's a big, clunky word. I'll describe it, I'll define it in a second. But basically, what it means is basically like applying the patterns of life and living systems to everything you do. I've been studying regenerative design and then practicing it. And that's a term that we use really intentionally and deliberately in the community of regenerative practitioners, because we very strongly believe that there's no room for like experts, sage on a stage, white lab coat, that whole thing. If we really are going to shift paradigms, it needs to be like a collective experience and a collective exploration. So I've been studying and then practicing regenerative pretty much everything. So I apply it to my business. I run a small business. I'm a leadership coach. And so I apply the patterns of living systems in my coaching with clients. That's the kind of primary place where I use it. And then I do a lot of what I would call nature immersion type of experiences. I'm a forest bathing guide, and I also host retreats. And so I've been doing a lot of like working in and with people in nature. And that's also supplemented by just a lot of hands-on work that I do. So I'm a volunteer in my local community. I'm a master naturalist and Rock Creek Park weed warrior. So I I kid you not, I'm called a weed warrior. It's not the kind of weed that you might be thinking. And we pull invasive
It's pulling
species.
weeds. And I've done that in my community. There's this weed killer called Roundup that's poison. They were spraying it in like the parks where dogs sniff and children play and adults lay around on the grass. And people in the community said, well, we don't want you to spray poison. So they said, well, what are we going to do with the weeds? And a bunch of people raised their hand and said, we'll pull them.
Yeah, it's been a pretty active program for a long time. We have a really big national park that runs right through the middle of Washington, D.C., which is where I live. It's one of the oldest national parks in the country. And it is, it's like, the capital's like backyard, basically. Like everybody goes there and hangs out, like you said, lay around in the grass. And so there's this massive volunteer corps of people who remove invasive species like vines and other weeds that essentially they're so adaptable that they take up the habitat of what would be native species that are often like endangered and diminished because they can't find enough habitat. And so we remove the invasive species to create more space and also like create like better environments for pollinators and things. So basically it is regeneration like in action, because the word regeneration, really what it means is to create the conditions for life. And so that's really what you're doing when you're removing like harmful weeds and creating space for native species to grow and pollinators and stuff.
To clarify about a weed, because that's a big judgment. Say, oh, this plant is better than that plant, and I like this one better, so that one's a rose, and I don't like that one, and that's a weed. But as you said, it's a non-native invasive species that's taking over. So it's not that we're judging one plant above the other. We're just looking at that invasive species got there because a person, humans, brought it accidentally mostly, and then it's taking over because there's no natural predator. So the effort is like a restoration.
And it's not just like that the weeds are taking up space. A lot of them are actually like quite harmful to the environment. Yeah, and they can
to
can
people,
be toxic,
or animals, like
it can be pretty problematic. And some of them, yes, they were brought by humans, oftentimes accidentally, but a lot of times it was very intentional. It was like, there's this beautiful tree that I saw in Beijing or somewhere, and I think it would look really great in Central Park or, wherever. And so people just brought them over and planted them, not knowing, so this is where the unintentional part came, that it would like proliferate and really dominate the whole landscape. There's a whole lot of metaphors in there too, right?
Yeah, so many, so many. But I also want to know some more specific examples of how, like, you said a regenerative lifestyle or kind of mirroring a natural system. Like, give some examples of like how that would play out in somebody's life if a listener maybe wanted to just start practicing that at home on their own.
Yeah, so one of the big sort of patterns or principles in living systems is this concept of the natural cycle of life. So birth, growth, death, and decay. A simplified version, of course, of like what happens in living systems. And we all know this because if we've ever encountered like the seasons, for example, or like fall leaves, we've all encountered that. And we all kind of know it just innately because we are living systems, and we know that things like, our hair and our fingernails and our skin and all that, there's a birth, growth, death, and decay cycle that happens. What I like to do is kind of play around with that a little bit and experiment with what would it look like to design one's life to actually align with that life cycle on multiple scales. And I call it nested rhythms. And so I did this for myself when I took a regenerative sabbatical. I designed a sabbatical for myself, applied the natural cycle of life at different time scales to pretty much everything that I did. So my sleep rhythms, my activity, my exercise and like physical rhythms, how often I was resting versus being productive and effortful, using that as like a way to just kind of track, like where am I growing, what's decaying, what needs to be composted for nutrients in order to like feed the next thing that I want to start, and just being really like mindful and intentional about that throughout my entire sabbatical, which is its own like nested rhythm of like rest and effort. So I had been working nonstop my entire adult life. I'd never taken more than like a 2-week break. It turns out that's not like the most sustainable way to be a living being. And so I hit a breaking point where I needed to stop. And I was able to take advantage of an opportunity and design a lengthy period of rest for myself. And the first 3 months or so of my sabbatical, I basically did nothing because I couldn't, right? I didn't have the energy reserves that are required to like start another growth cycle until I had sufficient enough rest.
So when you say you did nothing, I'm just going to push back. Like, you can't do nothing. Even if you sat in child pose and sobbed, that's something. So I just want to drill down into like some specifics. Like, how does one design something? What does it look like to go through the decay and compost? What are we decaying and composting? I'm sure that everything. Walk us through some examples of what that might look like.
Yeah. So a lot of the composting that happens in that period of like, quote, doing nothing is letting go of old beliefs and patterns and like de-patterning. So I was working on basically dissolving some of those inner myths that we were talking about earlier. And this is like a process that can take a while, and it requires a lot of intentionality and focus, which can be hard if you're tired. So that's why it took so long, was because I was tired, and to be able to like really work on my inner self, it was a stretch. It was a big challenge in those early days of sabbatical.
Sure. So if you don't mind just telling us personally, for you, then you don't have to. You can say no. But
Yeah.
I'd like to know personally, like what inner myth you were telling yourself that you really had to deconstruct.
The biggest inner myth for me was really around like work and value and like self-worth. And so it was
something like I'm worthless if I'm not productive, something like that.
Work defines me. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. If I don't have a title, if I'm not producing something of value that's visible in the world, that I can point to and say like I made that, or I'm working on that. So a lot of that kind of inner dialogue around value and self-worth and worthiness, that's very much tied to work and productivity, which is a really, like, I'm not obviously the only person who's ever had that story. And so when I coach people, that's often like where we end up, is that inner story around work and personal value.
So I hope you don't mind if I share this story, but I'm going to, and I think PJ might relate to it. You mind, tell me and I'll edit it out. But Sarah and I have talked about this. We both, when we were little kids, just got good grades in school. And I'm guessing you did too, PJ. And just to the listeners, look, if you didn't get good grades in school, I didn't do anything. I just was kind of born into the kind of person who is a school person. And PJ's nodding, and I've had this conversation with Sarah. It doesn't mean we're better than anybody else. Although you get a little star when you're a child next to your name, and you're told you're better. And there's this weird subconscious thing that happens. It's like I was good in school, so that means I'm going to have some success in life. And when you're 8 years old, the success is an imaginary success that's somehow going to come someday. And then all of a sudden you're 40, 50, and you're like, wait a second, I was the good student. I was supposed to have my big success. And then I think that I had a crash, and your crash was different than mine, but at some point you realize, wait a second, I was promised my gold star.
Yeah.
Where is it?
Yeah, I remember specifically having this conversation with my husband.
Who's also a gold star,
he's a total gold
solar
star.
astrophysicist.
Yeah, he's a total gold star. And it was like, I don't even remember how it came up, but we were talking about like, those high school like superlatives in yearbooks, like most likely to whatever. And I was the person in my high school yearbook that was voted most likely to succeed. Like, kid you not.
It's pressure. It's so much pressure.
Right, of course. Yes, of course. So we were talking about that, and it was kind of like, where are they now? Right. And this was like a week after my job had just been offshored, and I was like laid off, right? from like this real big wig global role that I had. And it was like, the girl who was most likely to succeed is like unemployed, I mean, how do you reconcile that? And so there was a whole kind of inner thing that I had to work through around that. And I did it with the help, I am proud to say, of a very, very good coach, who worked with me for like a year, basically, before, in the lead up to that, because I knew it was coming. And then a little bit of the kind of, what do I do now with myself now that I'm not working?
All that stuff about needing to achieve a certain level that's basically plugged into your brain before you're old enough to like guard against it and put up a boundary. Right. Imagine we're three women. Imagine if you're like the son of a wealthy, white businessman, how much pressure there must be to perform to a certain level. It's like, no wonder people turn out to be assholes, for lack of a better term. It puts you into that ego asshole place. It forces you there until you have a reckoning.
My most likely was most likely to marry at 40, and it would be a merger, not a marriage.
Oh, wow. That's a cut.
I mean, that's brutal, man.
So how do we now make this podcast relatable to people who weren't like, well, miss, I got an A on every fucking test? It just so happens that the three of us have a similar, good grade in school thing. Somebody else had some other thing. And I really want to emphasize that the system that we grew up in chose that thing to elevate it and didn't choose someone else's thing that they were born with to elevate. That's how the disconnection starts when you're a kid in school and they're grading you, and some people get a good grade and some people don't.
I don't think that's the only way they do it. In American culture, it's a very athletic culture. Athleticism is seen as a way to success, still is. It's that same treadmill of, well, here's one track, maybe academics, here's another track, athleticism. I mean, there are all these tracks that inevitably at some point, every single person will fail. There isn't a single person alive who succeeds at all the things that their ambition drives them to. Would you say, Sarah, you learn as much from your failures as your successes?
Oh, completely. And failures in quotes, right? Like,
right, right, exactly. What's a failure?
Yeah. I mean, I lived the first huge chunk of my life completely terrified of failure, of the possibility of failure, not realizing that like it was happening all the time. And, it just depends on like how you measure things, right? Another example of like how this separation happens, like when we're really young, is when I was going through school, like I was very good at art and I was really interested in science, but I could not do both because that didn't exist. That wasn't an option. It was like, you can either be a creative or you can be like technical. It sounds like maybe a bit petty or selfish or something, but like that was really hard.
And really wrong, too, because so many artists use technical skills to create their art, number one. And of course, there's a ton of art in science.
And that's a lot of what I end up doing in my coaching work and like leadership development in general, is like bringing more of the whole person into leadership, or just kind of how you show yourself in the world, and how you what you include and what you don't. And I work with so many leaders out there who are very compartmentalized because they've been taught to be compartmentalized, and they've been trained that that's the road to success. As a coach, it's one of my favorite things to work with, is like that kind of onion skin, like peeling away the layers. And they're way more effective in leadership, right? If they can bring more of that like whole self into it.
tell the story of how you are able now to incorporate the art and the technical side, because you're doing it, or you've done it.
News flash for all the kids out there who are like into science and art and like can't figure out what is an option career-wise. So there are options. One that I discovered when I was at NASA is called graphic facilitation. I go to like big meetings and I draw on the walls while people are talking.
It's really cool. I know
It's
it sounds
very
like
cool.
a 2-year-old, but it's like the best 2-year-old ever.
Yeah, it's a combination of like illustration and text, like handwritten text, and it's done in rapid fire. Like it's because you have to keep up with a whole dialogue of conversation with oftentimes many people. It's really, really hard, but really, really fun and extremely rewarding. And it's just a great way to like, for me to kind of use that creative side, but I can often use it in very like technical contexts. So I did this while I was at NASA, and I was like literally drawing pictures of like space shuttles and satellites and, launch control facilities and stuff, astronaut flight suits. And I had to know enough of the technical to be able to like draw like semi-accurate figures and whatnot.
The benefit to somebody who's either watching the person do this creative stuff or like in the audience, for example, is that there's different kinds of ways to learn things. And if somebody's talking or there's a discussion and there's a visual representation of that discussion, it gets in better. Not just to like some learners, but to all learners or all people. And then the other nice thing about it is that there's this visual representation of what happened afterward, and you can look at it again. So it really does help like the integration of the message.
So I'd love to hear more about your ideas of like how regeneration is this new story about living systems, but also, why are we struggling so hard with this?
So it's new and it's not. That's the first thing to know about regeneration. And I see you're both like, yeah, because if you think about it for like more than a minute, it's pretty obvious that like what regeneration is all about is actually a very old and still current way of seeing and being in the world that has existed for many, many thousands of years in indigenous culture and Eastern traditions, basically non-Western colonial traditions. And it basically, it kind of flips those three myths on its head. So humans are not separate from nature. Humans are part of the Earth living system, the whole planet as a living system. And they are not better than or over and more power over, holding power over any other living species on this planet. And so a lot of people in the regenerative practitioner community will say things like the more than human world. Anybody who's ever spent time with a dog knows about the more than human world, right? Like they are really special beings and we are not better than them.
So for those of you who aren't watching, my dog Piper has climbed up onto my lap and keeps sticking her head into the camera, and I'm trying to keep her quiet.
If you've ever spent time like watching a hawk just like fly, like that's the more than human world. There's this world of like wonder and amazement that lives with us on this planet, and we are not separate from it and we're not better than it. We do have a more complex brain, but that doesn't give us the power to tread on all of these other living beings that we actually share this planet with. And we're part of the same system. Like there is no separation.
And I would even argue that our brains, I don't know, I have questions about the human brain. I mean, come on. We elected the stupidest human to run the country.
Well, exactly. And this is a point that I've been really driving home in a lot of my conversations lately when people kind of push back. They're like, oh, but humans are more intelligent and they are better in these ways. And it's like, okay.
Are we?
I'm with you. I question this because if you think about it, the number one pattern in living systems is to create the conditions for life. That is like a signal of a regenerative being or system, is creating the conditions for life. If you look at what humans have been doing on this planet, does it sound like creating the conditions for life? No. We're actually destroying the conditions that we even need to live and survive.
We put poison on our own food.
We've proven over and over again that we don't know how to create conditions for life. for our own life, for other life on this planet. And so to me, like that's all the evidence you need to say that like humans are not the model of regeneration. And therefore they're not the example or the standard that we should be like living up to, if you will. So I often will use the phrase life-centered design. I like life-centered because I came out of the school of human-centered design, which is something that a lot of people have heard of and know, or at least kind of understand.
Can
lightly.
you explain it just in case people don't know?
Yeah, so human-centered design is like a methodology to create products and services with humans at the center. So, for example, like if I'm designing the way that a bank is going to work, I can do it from the point of view of like the dollars that are in that bank and design everything based on the dollars. Or I can design it based on the customer and their experience when they walk through the door of that bank or when they're engaging digitally with that bank, and design every part of that experience and interface from the point of view of a human being. That's human-centered design. Human-centered design is wonderful, and it's created a lot of really good improvements in like products and services. And in my opinion, it's incomplete because it doesn't include the rest of the living beings on this planet. And so you can design the very best bank for humans, but it could also be, I don't know, generating a shit ton of carbon. Maybe it's paved over a huge forest to build that bank. If you're not using life-centered design, you're leaving out this huge part of the equation, which is the rest of life on this planet. And when you think about it, like the whole being focused on human flourishing is really at the center of like everything that we experience. Everything that we are building is just for us. We're not building AI for forests.
Here come the data centers that will create more pollution and destroy more water systems, and that's not human flourishing.
Exactly. Even the definition of human flourishing is this system that you were talking about before: who has the most money, who has the biggest house, who has the biggest title under their name. It's not authentic flourishing, which would mean clean water, clean air, healthcare.
And is it human flourishing for all humans or just some humans?
Just the top earners.
Or just the people who happen to be using your product.
Yeah,
right, exactly.
And I would argue that if all of life isn't flourishing, then I'm not flourishing. If I walked past a dead hawk instead of a flying hawk, that would affect me negatively. Affect the hawk worse, but still.
What you just said, like if all of life is not flourishing, then I'm not flourishing. Like that's a perfect example of regeneration and like the ethos behind it. If it's not everything, if we're not all flourishing, then it's not truly regenerative because it's not serving all of life. And that's where it gets really hard. Like people who are in the regenerative practitioner space get tripped up a lot, and myself included, because it's really hard to actually create products and services and systems that truly are in service of all of life, because the system that we're working in doesn't really allow for that. Like it's got limits built in.
Is there one example of something that people could do? I mean, all I can think of is like growing a garden in your yard.
Yeah. I mean, that's usually the level at which I tend to suggest like getting started. Even if it's not on your property, like maybe a community garden or volunteering in a local park is a great way to learn the practice of regeneration and actually participate in it. Another example that is a little bit harder to grasp, I think for a lot of people, myself included, is applying the patterns of living systems to economics, finance, like the whole economic system. There's a whole community of people that I'm a part of who are really looking at like what comes after capitalism.
Tell us, please. Tell us.
If I knew, I probably would be doing something else with my time right now. I don't know, but I honestly don't know the answer. And I think that anybody who you talk to who's serious about this would admit right away that they do not know the answer, because there is no single answer. But the good news is people are exploring it.
And it's so interesting because, regenerative economics is a concept. Like that's, if you Google it, lots of people talking about it, not necessarily agreeing on what it means. But yeah, I think the whole idea of applying natural systems to economics seems to make an awful lot of sense.
Where would you start? I'm thinking of myself selfishly, but I was also thinking of the listeners. It's like who may want to say, okay, this is a love letter to the future. We've really outlined quite well, I think, some of the things that aren't working, that are crumbling. So then, even from the ashes, what's the tiny green sprout for people who are listening?
On the regenerative economics subject in particular, there's some really good programs out there. Do it with other people. That's really part of the methodology, is like, it can't be done alone. And so it's a lot of it is unlearning and relearning and like learning new things together collectively in public. It really requires showing up in like a classroom or a collective kind of setting and being really vulnerable and acknowledging that you don't know the answers. So you can't do it alone. You got to do it with other people, and you have to be comfortable with not having the answers. The people I've met through that they're almost more important and valuable than any of the actual like lessons that I learned or the things I read in books.
So Sarah, this idea of regeneration, and I know you do a lot of leadership training, how do you apply regenerative principles to leadership? What does that look like?
I'll say maybe like the most important one that I come back to over and over again because it seems so relevant in almost every leadership scenario that I encounter these days. And it has to do with change. So change in organizations, and therefore for change for leaders, has traditionally been something that we treat as like an event that needs to be managed. Like, there's a change that's happening. Let's plan how we're going to roll it out and how we're going to talk about it and communicate the change and get everyone on board. And it's like a process that has a beginning, middle, and an end. In living systems and in regeneration, change is actually just a feature of being alive.
Right.
Turns out, right? All you have to do is think about like aging as a process to remember that change is just happening. It is part of what it means to be alive. That's a big mindset shift that I will bring into like a leadership development program right at the start, because people are always preoccupied with change. They feel like it's happening to them. It's this big event.
They don't want it to happen. They hate it.
Yeah, because it's a threat, right? It's a threat to the status quo, the way things should work, have worked. If you can get that mindset shift of like change is a feature of being alive, and therefore if you're working in a living system and you want to keep that living system alive and vital and healthy and resilient, change is part of the package, and it's a good thing. And it can be embraced. What that often looks like is, for leaders, is really tapping into another big hallmark of regeneration, which is emergence, and paying attention to what is emerging, listening for signals, not trying to like predict necessarily, but just to notice as things are emerging. That's like that's a leadership capability that is not well honed, I would say. And also designing for emergence, right? You can actually take a proactive role in creating the conditions for emergence rather than trying to like stomp down and keep everything quiet and controlled and predictable.
Or you could water the garden.
Thanks. That really does help, because at its bottom line, what you just said is the ultimate new mythos idea, which is we're not about telling stories about the status quo. All stories are ultimately about solving a problem. If you're always thinking that the answer is reverting to the status quo, you will always fail. I love that that's a central part of what you're doing, because it's certainly reflected in everything we see in the story of how we are has to change.
I want to do a whole episode on emergence.
We really should, because it's such an important concept. And emerge from your chrysalis of existence. One of the things that strikes me listening to this is how healing and how whole both organizations and the people in it can be. That sense of separation, that sense of isolation, we're seeing that writ large right now in so many ways, in the social isolation people are feeling, in the choices that they're making because of it. The extreme of that is when we talk about the tech bros. This is mental illness writ large. This is psychosis. They are hurting people, and they're happy about it. It's their goal. What can we do to convince people to come together and work on these kinds of projects, because I think there's so much inherent healing that could go on.
One of the really powerful ways that I think it could happen is through what's called bioregionalism. What it is people organizing around what's called a bioregion, which is an area of land and often water.
Like a valley or a mountaintop.
Or a watershed. Sometimes it's even bigger than that. Like it's like Cascadia is one of the big ones in like the Pacific Northwest. So you have like these larger units of collectives of people and the other living beings that they share land with as their habitat, working together to understand like what does this bioregion need to be alive and well, to be healthy and resilient. I personally find that movement really, really inspiring and exciting. That's a way for people to kind of like find a place of belonging.
And it's called say the name of it again?
Yeah, bioregionalism. So this is another way to answer your earlier question, Laura, of like how can people get involved, like even if it's in a small way. You can look up if there's like a bioregion active community in your area and see what projects are happening within that.
I live in New Zealand. The indigenous culture is such an integral part of this nation. There are things that have happened here, like giving personhood to a river, not just because the river exists, because the river is an integral part of the bioregion and the ecosystem within which animals and humans thrive. And so that river's health and happiness is integral to the health and happiness of everything around it. Have you heard of any other things like that?
That would be so good if we could have rivers as persons.
This river's protected.
That would be so good.
And it was a Maori initiative. The white European settlers here are referred to as Pakeha. It was definitely not Pakeha who were behind this.
I wonder what it would take to get that to happen in other places in the world.
Ironically, in the United States, the only thing that isn't human that has personhood are corporations, which if that isn't a metaphor and a myth that needs to end, I don't know.
That would be the number one thing I would want to get rid of. But I mean, we have hope. Things have come to a peak here. There is going to be a turn, and that's why we called it Love Letters to the Future, because maybe we are just writing this love letter right now to the rivers in the world. Wouldn't it be great if the Amazon had personhood? The Mississippi, the Ganges.
If you can find a way to connect with an actual place, wherever you live, and really get to know it, you know, whether it's a big river like that or just a small park, to me, that has been the most powerful shift in my personal life. Like when I trained to become a master naturalist, then I trained to become a forest bathing guide, then I trained to become a weed warrior, but it was all connected to this one particular park. I have a relationship with this park. You know, if a tree has fallen, like I will notice it. There's that story, right? Like, will anyone notice when the tree falls? I'll notice because I spent a lot of time in this park, you know.
It's your family member now.
And I feel very protective of it, and I feel protected by it.
So I have a question.
Uh-oh. The look on your face.
I just came up with it just now. Normally I plan them out. This is like a new question. We've been doing this podcast for a little while now. I edit them. And one thing I've begun to notice is right around the hour mark, people start to just feel done.
It could be that we've just kind of like become so programmed.
Yeah, maybe we're machines and we're programmed by the hours. So do you have an opinion on that?
A hunch that I have is that part of it is just like sort of our machine-like programming that we've just kind of like adopted over so many years of just operating like on hourly cycles. I'll give you an example of like how I experienced this on a slightly different scale, which is a little more terrifying. When I left my corporate job, that was a job where we build in 15-minute increments. And so I became programmed to like operate in 15-minute increments like a robot.
Wow.
Oh my God.
And I didn't work there for very long, okay?
That just sounds awful.
Remember I talked about the sabbatical, like it took a while. Part of what I was doing was deprogramming out of this like 15-minute thing where like every 15 minutes I'd look around, like I'm expected to like be somewhere or do something.
Makes me think of every lawyer and every accountant in the world.
Because they charge on 15-minute increments, don't they?
Yeah.
They do.
Wow.
If there are any lawyers and accountants out there, we'd love to hear if that, in fact, when you left your position, did you look around every 15 minutes?
Yes, tell us in the comments.
I would not be surprised. I've been researching sabbaticals. So I would say, no, it is not possible for everybody to take a sabbatical. I really would hope that it's
well, maybe that's the love letter to the future, is to build sabbatical into every kind of lifestyle.
It's a really weird, like, out of body kind of experience to stop working and then have to figure out how to spend time. Like, what is your relationship with time and space, like your physical space? And I'm not just speaking about this, like, yes, I had that experience. And then I interviewed like 30 people who also did sabbaticals, and they all had the exact same experience.
Really?
It almost sounds like the shutdown during the beginning months of COVID.
Exactly.
I mean, we were all so siloed. Some people were still working at a grocery store or working in the hospital, and other people were working remotely with like kids climbing all over them, and other people were completely alone and had nothing.
I think you're right. I think there's a lot of similarities to COVID. There's also a really interesting parallel to like retirement. Take a random Wednesday, practice being retired, and let your body actually feel that experience, because then you'll have that muscle memory.
That's a great idea.
Did you leave home at any point during your sabbatical?
I chose to focus most of my sabbatical time hyper local and really like work on regenerating a piece of land that is important to me and close to where I live.
Can you walk to the park from your house?
Yeah,
you don't even have to get in a car. Okay,
it's
so
out my
I mean,
window.
to me, that would be the ideal sabbatical. Even if I left to go somewhere where you don't have to get in a car.
The vision that I think a lot of people have of what a sabbatical, it's like a gap year, and you just go like travel the world. It costs money to travel the world. You might have responsibilities at home, like kids, parents, elder care, pets. This is why like I kind of developed the program that I've developed, which is really about like taking a sabbatical in midlife and getting really, really connected to your community and a sense of place, and reconnecting with yourself through that process.
That's Sadie. Sorry. Everybody's wanting their dinner now. All the animals are hungry at the same time. Like, you go scuba diving, right? You're like, it's one of the places where you're the most removed from human interference, and like the fish all kind of feed at sunrise and sunset. The seals all come out to feed at sunrise and sunset. The birds in the trees, they make a lot of noise right around sunrise and sunset because they're hungry and eating. And my cats are asking them for dinner.
I'm so used to hearing Laura's cats because, like, whenever we talk on the phone, I'm always hearing the cats.
Exactly. There's not a conversation where I'm not hearing the animals.
Yeah.
It's part of your living system, Laura.
I'm thrilled, Sarah, to have met you. Can you talk to the audience about how to find you?
Best way to find me is probably on my website, which is sarahLDeWitt.com.
And we'll put that in the show notes.
And then I have a workshop coming up at the Omega Institute in Rhinebeck, New York, June 5th through 7th, which will be in person, and it's going to combine kind of all of these things. So we're going to spend a lot of time with regenerative principles, some coaching, some forest bathing, and even a little bit of the visual facilitation as well. It should be very cool.
Sarah, thank you so much. This has been marvelous. Laura, do you have anything to add?
I don't know. Hi. Sarah, I'll probably talk to you in 5 minutes. PJ, I'll probably talk to you in 10. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm so glad you're here. I love you. Be good. And we will see you next time. Bye.
Bye.